Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Today, we're going to be going over innovation once again. I'm sorry, startups. All right, so let's start off with section one, as always, which is developing an idea. So it's important to always note that a founder's first goal is to create a product that ultimately solves a conflict for customers. So founders should try to ask these questions when coming up with an idea. Like, who is the product for? Why is the product actually needed? What problem does it solve? Is it actually important enough? And is there a need for this actual product? And a quote from Steve Blank, who's a famous Silicon Valley entrepreneur, is that more startups lack from a failure from most okay, I'm sorry. More startups fail from a lack of customers than from a failure of product development. So maybe you could have a nice product, but you don't have an actual market for your product to be out there, and that's why your startup might just end up failing automatically. All right, finding a co-founder. So if you look around at most of the successful startups, they usually have both a founder and a co-founder. Despite this, most failures in startups themselves are caused by conflicts between the two founders. So it's really important here to be truthful about your strengths and weaknesses in order to find a co-founder that complements your skills. And there are a few tips for hiring that are listed here. Don't just give everybody a high title. Don't automatically follow the major companies' recruiting techniques. Um, Hire those who have faith in your company and have trial periods for potential employees. So, understanding equity and compensation models. Don't leave anything out of discussion when it comes to the equity distributions among co founders. Unequal split of equity or profit can ultimately just lead to distrust. And giving an even share to each co founder helps the company come first. It's also important to have equity discussion early so that both lawyers and shareholders don't need to be involved. Debunking myths. So it's important to debunk some myths when it comes to starting a startup that might be just some misconceptions that people think is necessary or not necessary. Like to start off, you don't need to rent an office immediately if you're starting off. Working in a garage, library, coffee shop, or spare bedroom is fine. If a formal work setting is required for your specific startup, you can always visit AWS lofts to be in proximity of technical experts. It's important to always keep an eye on your monthly expenses as a startup, like rent and payroll. And you want to measure the rate at which your profit grows. And you also want to measure the cost that you're facing um, when you're acquiring new customers. Also, you want to make sure you're following set timetables in order to keep on pace with your goals. Customer discovery. So try to validate your idea by discussing your product with different people that you might know who could give you some feedback. This could include people like friends, family, or even potential customers. Customer discovery is just evaluating, correcting, and refining your idea. And it requires a repetitive cycle like building, learning, testing, and evaluating. The more customer feedback that you have, the more advantage that comes with it. And you'll be able to give customers what they crave since you'll know what they want based off the feedback that they give to you. And again, another video that would be found in the description of the live stream once we've ended. If you would like to learn more about this specific topic, which in this case is equity and compensation models. All right, section two, We're going to start off section 2 by learning how to find and listen to customers. So, interviews with customers are ultimately the best way to receive feedback, and this is going to help you figure out what matters to them, just like we said before. Every idea is going to start with finding a new way to please customers as a startup, because that's your ultimate goal. You also want to constantly update and keep up with the customer's needs as they change so that you can adapt your product to it. And you want to determine whether your services are going to be used by consumers or even other businesses. We have some tips on this slide for communicating with your customers. There are five here. So, number one is just staying away from vague inquiries, um, like just avoiding yes or no questions. You want to inquire fundamental questions which are designed to evince insight, and general open ended questions are usually more beneficial. You also want to end your conversations by asking the customer who else to talk to so you can network around and get the best result. Excuse me. So, customer validation and understanding your market. Customer validation is finding and comprehending your customer market. And it's important to once again note that enthusiasm doesn't necessarily mean that you have a large market. But in order to figure out how large your market actually is, maybe you can ask yourself these questions. Is it large enough to support your business? How many people are going to be buying your product? Is your product or market new or does it already exist? You can check out your CTR rate or your click through rate if you have a website or any digital advertising. And you can also create a sign up page for your product's launch. And you're also going to consider how much money it's going to take to reach your markets. Software only products usually cost much less as compared to hardware only costs. And you want to consider implementation roadblocks like following certain rules for the specific industry involved. Also, you want to try to know your competition and learn from their mistakes to set yourself apart. If you know your competitor's mistake, you can avoid that mistake and ultimately create a product that doesn't have that problem and is going to be preferred by customers because of that. Building a prototype. So, a prototype is something that is created in order to see whether or not a certain product is going to succeed after launch. So, as you might know, a prototype is basically just a blueprint of your product. It's focused on learning about the product initially rather than coding and adding to it. And a prototype has to be added in order to make the product best suited for your customer's needs. You don't want to hurry the process of actually making the product's prototype, and you want to check frequently to make sure that the prototype follows your goal. All right, an MVP. So an MVP is a minimum viable product, and it's typically the first product that a company makes. It's thought of as the simplest edition of a product that still proves a hypothesis. And as little features as possible that are required to support the key function are put into the MVP. It's the first product to be ready for the consumer market, and it usually just tests a hypothesis and is a bare bone structure of what the idea was actually meant to be. It's just like a prototype, and it's not going to be ideal. And this is also because it prioritizes functionality over aesthetics. So, how to develop an MVP? So, building an MVP has multiple repetitive cycles, and it goes through processes like designing, building, deploying, and also measuring. With each addition of new processes, the MVP is going to become steadily better over time, and it's going to allow for both quick and responsive feedback from users. You want to make sure to keep your MVP as simple as possible. Quote from Reid Hoffman, who's an internet entrepreneur, reads, "If you aren't embarrassed by the first version of your product, you shipped too late." And there's a picture of Reid Hoffman to the right. You also want to add features after your hypothesis has been verified. Another video that's going to be found in the description of the live stream. All right, section 3, sprints. So a sprint is a process that is used often when developing your software, and it's a certain amount of time where predetermined work is completed. So it has a fixed theme and objective, and it has a deliverable function as well. Something important to note is that it should last from about 1 to 2 weeks, and the shorter is the better because your goals won't change. You want to save customer feedback for the next sprint, and you want to prioritize primary business functions. You want to focus on the high effect and be quick to build work. And a senior software developer at AWS, Nikki Stone, says, "You have the capacity to build one great product, so make sure it's the right one." The recommendations after sprints are continuous implementation and constant delivery. Potential pitfalls. So, an anti pattern is a universal response to a conflict which is unproductive. Being prepared for this is going to help prevent whether they undoubtedly show up. Technical debt gathers when engineers rush through work instead of just focusing on quality and proper implementation. Technical debt doesn't necessarily come from laziness, but instead a strategic decision to swiftly eradicate a conflict. Not generalizing code can actually lead to extra coding work and refactoring, which is undifferentiated heavy lifting. Customers in the end really just want the product, and they don't mind if you borrow from existing resources. So here are some fundamentals that you could keep in mind when working with AWS. One of them is the difference between the one-door decision and the two-door decision. It's important to note that these decisions don't happen equally. Two-door decisions are more common and occur the majority of the time. One-door decisions should be thought through thoroughly. Security decisions are one-door decisions and can't be remade. When making these security decisions, you have to consider both your and AWS's responsibilities. So, who gets access to certain objects amongst the workforce, and how much access to do users receive? Startups on AWS receive enterprise level security, and if you're working with AWS, you're offered SSL and DDoS protection. SSL basically just stands for Secure Sockets Layer, and it's standard security technology for creating a protected link between both a web server and a browser. DDoS, on the other hand, stands for Distributed Denial of Service, and it's a cyber attack that interferes with the services of the host. Startups have to know the relation of their product with the government, healthcare, and more, and they have to follow any rules and regulations of the field that they're in. Points of integration must also be considered because developers are not going to be able to understand a product without the proper documentation. An API is an application programming interface, and it's basically a set of guidelines which connects with another person's software. It's really important here to select the correct database for the type of data that you actually will need to store. Now for an introduction to data architecture with AWS. So a monolithic architecture is an architecture that combines all the working parts of an application, like data input, output, processing, air handling, and more, all together into one singular program. It allows for the rapid development because you don't need to make the processes ahead of time. And a well-designed monolith can be scaled horizontally and then even broken apart at a later date. Architecture applications like Amazon Elastic Beanstalk are going to automate all the processes for you, and it's just much simpler to work and handle. Microservices are independent services that each perform their own function, and microservices work together as a single product. But if one microservice goes down, the others are unaffected. Microservices, however, are good for scaling large systems, but they take longer to build. So you want to optimize your data architecture for speed. Serverless is a type of architecture where servers that code is running on don't need to be set up by the actual user, and it grants more time to focus on the actual code. It automatically scales for the user to avoid themselves from having to predict actual customer traffic. So now for legal needs and assessing them. A common legal decision that a business makes is whether or not it becomes a legal entity. A legal entity is when a company gains legal rights and obligations like tax filings. There are multiple types of legal entities, like limited liability. To go into more detail, limited liability is the detachment of personal resources from business resources, and it prevents the business's owner's responsibility in both losses and legal liability. It exists to help business owners take risks without the fear of legal liability in action. But it's not perfect and it's not a get out of jail free card. So, what are unincorporated entities? These are businesses that do not have limited liability and they're known as unincorporated entities. The two types is sole proprietorship and general partnerships. Sole proprietorship is owned by a business and is managed by one person. On the other hand, a general partnership has numerous owners and splits up the responsibilities amongst these owners. There's no legal difference between the owner and the actual business itself, and sole proprietorship is cheaper to start, but it comes with less overhead. And sole proprietorship risks the owner's personal resources. Another video found in the description of the live stream once we end it. Okay, we're going to be starting off section 4 by talking about finding a lawyer. So, an option for businesses that are a legal entity is to converse with large startup law firms. And these types of firms don't make business owners pay upfront, but instead take a percentage of the company. If businesses don't want to work with large law firms, they can work with startup friendly firms such as Atrium. Atrium's a corporate law firm that uses machine learning software in order to automate legal processes. Another option to find counsel is colleague and friend recommendation. NDAs, IP, and other legal considerations. So, an NDA stands for a non disclosure agreement, and it's an agreement that prevents unauthorized disclosure of secrets. If one's assigning development work to an outside organization, then that organization should have to sign an NDA. A venture capitalist provides startups with funds, but receives a return investment. A venture capitalist organization is most likely not going to sign an NDA. A founders agreement is a necessary legal step when there are multiple founders involved, because it can outline the responsibilities of each founder involved. No template has to be used as a reference. It can be hard to publicate. There are often numerous negotiations, and it can be very time consuming to finish. What's an intellectual property or an IP protection? It's a type of legal concept that provides legal protection for assets. The trademark is a type of IP protection which shields the product of a company from being copied. The patents guard an organization's product, and they give the patent owner the right to prevent others from using, creating, or even selling the patented product. These patents usually last several years. And you might ask, what is a copyright at this point? These are things that guard original artistic work. And for most startups, copyright itself is the primary IP protection. Fundraising. So fundraising is a full-time job and should be taken very seriously. Venture capital firms invest in companies they believe in hope that they're going to receive a large return. There are multiple seed investment types like pre-seed and seed and Series A and Series B. Pre-seed and seed is an investment that occurs early on before the actual company shows that the product is going to work. Series A and Series B is funding that's used to help continue to actually scale the business. The pressure to deliver when a venture capital invests can be high, and it's likely that a business, even with the support, is going to be out of business in only a few years. Some venture capital firms also work in pre seed or seed funding. Pre seed funding typically occurs in the early stages of product development. Pre-seed investments range from $50,000 to $250,000, while seed investments range from $250,000 to $1 million. In 12 to 18 months, a seed VC may want you to fundraise 2 times the amount given. And it's important to note, though, that when fundraising to a VC, you're ultimately adding another person that you have to answer to. But there are funding sources outside of VCs. Some of these include angel investors, non dilutive funding, crowdfunding, and accelerator programs. Angel investors are wealthy people who are looking to passively fund startups with capital in exchange for equity and convertible debt. They don't expect or want a 50 times return on the investment, but instead they usually have a different motivation. You'll see them invest about 25 to $250,000. For some angel investors, a 3 to 5 times return would be amazing. Non-dilutive funding. So this is money that is incorporated in order to support the product without having to give up any of its equity. Examples of this include bank loans or university and federal grants. Crowdfunding. So examples of this include Kickstarter and GoFundMe. They may assist in providing early adopters, and they may be more difficult than seed rounds. Accelerator programs are group-based programs where entrepreneurs produce their ideas into reality. They select a tiny percentage of companies and help make those companies grow. They usually invest approximately $20 to $150,000 and ask for a 5 to 7% equity return investment. They offer mentoring, training, and feedback and usually end up lasting for about 3 months. Crafting a fundraising narrative. So, a fundraising narrative shows why one is spending money in the first place. It's not the same as a pitch deck, as it's much less thorough. Although this is true, though, the primary questions still have to be answered. And these questions can include: what are you creating? What's the most captivating factor of your business? How much progress has been made, and what are you ultimately striving to achieve? The narrative should really just be short and sweet, and it should have the ability to informally be discussed with potential investors. It should be quick so that it can be explained in 20 seconds or less. Um, we've mapped it out on the slide. So the first 10 seconds should be: who are you? What are you doing? And why is it actually important? And then the last 10 seconds should have your progress, milestones, and your long-term vision. You want to find the one persuasive reason as to why your company should receive investment. A good narrative should have a strong financial plan in order to support its claim. And financial models are essentially inferences. And the last video, which is going to be found in the description. Oh, sorry, that wasn't the last video. On to section 5. We're starting off section 5 by talking about what makes a good pitch deck. Your pitch deck is basically your business card, and it's given to those who are in the best position to help you, like investors and mentors. One of the first things customers are going to see is the pitch deck, and it's going to leave a huge impression about your company. The key areas of a pitch deck include problem and solutions, the business model, the market, etc. Creating a deck includes starting with whatever is the most persuasive, keeping it incisive. It's better to be concise than to make investors disinterested. It's typically a length of about 10 to 13 slides long, and you want to make sure your deck answers the whys behind the investments, like: why is this a good opportunity? Why do you have the proper team to do it? And why is this round of funding fully necessary? This is how to prospect your initial fundraising funnel. So you want to generate contention among your investors. The 3-to-1 rule is important here if you want to generate competition between the investors. You want to be in the final stages of negotiation with 3 investors at the same time. And it's estimated to need about 10 meetings between investors, excuse me, in order to create a 3-to-1 situation. Some investor companies invest in numerous companies, while others only invest in a limited amount. Tools like Crunchbase and LinkedIn are going to help find investors if you can't find 20 or more to start with. Other entrepreneurs have VC companies that work with them, making it easy to get advice and how to approach them. You want to focus on people in the VC business and not just firms. Initiating fundraising mode. So you want to spend approximately 10% of the time creating relationships with potential investors and founders later on in the process. Relationships can make it easy and quick to find high level investments. You also want to negotiate and finalize with an investor before moving on and searching for a new group. Also, understand the different types of people who are working at a VC firm, like partners, venture partners, principals, and associates. Partners are generally the people who are going to make the most decisions. Venture partners are part time workers, and they usually look to source deals and make a couple of investments. Principals are new to the business and are just starting to make deals. And finally, associates cannot make investments but can help business owners actually navigate through the investment process. Make sure to attempt to have a mutual acquaintance that introduces you to the investor. Understanding the stages of growth. So there are multiple stages of company growth with all of them having different goals. Stage one, you want to deliver the product and you want to ask, can your team build something that customers are going to buy? Is the product ready to be sold on the market? After your first sale, you want to ask yourself if you can turn your few customers into a customer base. And the objective here is to obtain a large amount of sales. Stage two is expansion. So survival is basically guaranteed at this point, but now you want to build, and investors are guiding the business to further success. The startup is now a more mature business, and you're no longer considered a beginner. However, you really have to do your homework before in order to have a chance of reaching stage two, because obviously, stage one is the place where mostly it goes wrong for many startups. How to build a product roadmap. So there's a guide through the whole business process, from making a product to making your first sale. You want to create milestones throughout the map in order to help shareholders know where key important events are in the basic timeline. A B testing helps set apart two options when coming across how a certain variable must function. This test brings about valuable results um, about which option is going to perform the best based on a particular parameter or goal. And this helps to make your decisions less biased. It's an important decision when making a roadmap as to whether or not you need to pivot and where you need to pivot. If your product development team starts heading in the wrong direction, a pivot to your roadmap can help get things back on track. And if something's not working, don't force it and don't cause more trouble. Instagram is an example of a company who pivoted their idea from being a check in product to a place to post personal pictures to share with the world. They then stripped off any non essential features in order to both save money and better the app. Product and channel fit. So, how effective is the product at having customers find it publicly? Growing pains with startups. So, managing startups can cause long hours and can be extremely demanding. There are ways to conduct business with greater results for your employees and your own product as well. You want to create and enforce strict limits on work hours. And it's important to note that just throwing all your energy into a startup is going to hurt your product and its effectiveness. You instead want to generate nourishment codes for all your employees, or finish lines. And you want to pay a great amount of attention to the hiring process by employing people that fit your company culture, because that's the ultimate goal. Interviewing is also critical, and it's really important to consider if a candidate is going to contribute and just not be a non negative. A good interview question would be to ask how the candidate worked through a real life problem. At a startup with less than 100 employees, the CEO themselves should be making the hiring decisions. Culture. So, culture is really the persona of your company, and it's a mixture of work environment, the company mission, values, ethics, expectations, and goals. You want to think about having third party voices, giving a voice into the culture as your company, because this could be a possible benefit, hearing from multiple angles. You want to create a culture that can that can accommodate not just your culture, but the community, not your culture and strengths, but the community's strengths and weaknesses. Culture is not equal to perks though, and it's more difficult to generate than perks. You want to find different ways to talk to employees in mass, and information is received differently by different people, mentally speaking. So multiple pass-throughs are going to have to be used in order to spread necessary information. A founder should personally interview at least 50 people for the first hires. And they should develop effective interview questions and realize that defining culture is not the end. This is the bibliography for the entire slideshow. Thank you for watching once again, and we hope to see you next week.